Hi everyone, and thanks for joining. Just waiting for people to join in. And in the meantime, rather than leave you all here hanging on while we wait for everyone, we thought we'd show you a selection of BuzzBack staff pets. So all these are pets belong to members of staff, and they've been bringing lots and lots of happiness to everyone, especially over the last couple of years. And we thought we'd just take a look at them all together while we're waiting. And I must admit, I don't know about you, but it's certainly lifting my spirits, and I haven't seen many of these pets before. So who have we got here? I know not many names, I don't know of these pets, but they're all gorgeous. Bottom right I know is Eddie and Kyla. Those cats belong to Martin, who'll be presenting shortly, our managing director, who I'll be introducing. On their left, an absolutely wonderful name. This dog's name is Marble, I know, which is an absolutely fantastic name for a dog. I don't know if you can see a horse down there. We've mainly got horses and dogs and cats. We've got one horse there, which I'm guessing belongs to Alan, our VP and Director of Research Analytics. I don't know any other members of staff who have dogs, horses rather. For anyone joining just now, just to sort of just to explain to you why I'm talking about pets, we're just waiting a few more minutes for people to join in. We thought we'd show you a selection of BuzzBack's staff pets, which are absolutely delightful. I think we've got, so people are still joining, but we've got we're nearly there now. So I'm just going to get on with introducing Martin and Mary. Thanks for joining. The session is being recorded and will be shared with attendees afterwards. If you have questions, please submit them via the Q&A during the presentation, and we'll review the questions at the end. If you're watching this via the recording and have questions, please submit them to martin@buzzback.com. And I'd now like to introduce Mary Meehan and Martin Oxley. Mary is the co-founder of Panoramix Global, a next-generation research and consumer behaviour firm providing a hybrid analytic perspective that uses cultural and market data to deliver expert foresights driving consumer decision-making. In 2015, Mary launched Metametrics, a cloud-based cultural analytic tool that combines big data, proprietary tech, and rigorous big picture thinking to deliver insights to help businesses better understand their customers. Mary has worked with many big brands and speaks and writes frequently on the topics of consumer behaviour and market forces, and has contributed to outlets including Advertising Age, BBC, CNN, Wired, The Washington Post, and Fast Company. Martin established BuzzBack in Europe in 2007 to exploit the transformational power of the internet, having worked at Ipsos and TNS. He's interested in technology and how it applies to research, but is more interested in people. He's been a regular speaker at ESMR, MRS, and other industry conferences, and has won the Best Case Study at ESMR Congress. In 2009, he was awarded the MRS Fellowship for his outstanding contribution to the UK research industry. And I'd like to add that Martin is currently standing for ESMR Council, so if you are a member and yet to vote, please vote. Martin, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Matthew. You did say that the cats, that I owned those cats, but anyone on this call who has cats will know fully well that nobody has ever owned a cat. I think they own us, actually. I think they own us. And also, contrary to popular belief, I don't look like my cats either. They're very cute. And as you can see, I'm not. So today, in the next 35 or so minutes, we're going to talk about a subject that is, for me, perhaps one of the most important things we can talk about, which is trying to understand happiness and some other consumer emotions, and also the way they connect to brands. And I think anyone on this call who's ever tried to introduce a webinar or a conference presentation, they'll squirrel away on Google and try and find some profound quote, which is what I did this morning, and found it couldn't be more profound, perhaps. It was from Aristotle, the Greek philosopher. And what he had to say about happiness is that it's the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. Aim, I should say, not end. So what's quite interesting, I think, about that is that as we think today about happiness and the turmoil of what we're going through, pretty much true since humanity's been cultured and in existence. So we may think we're in the eye of a storm, but I think it's always probably been true. So today we will be taking you through sort of 4 chunks, really. a little bit about why we decided to focus on happiness. Then we'll dig into some consumer research looking at what consumers tell us happiness means to them. And in that, we will also be asking you to type into the chat what you think happiness means. But don't worry, when I will be showing some consumer videos, we'll ask you after that, and Matthew will remind you. Then Mary will take over and dig even deeper into sort of 5 key areas around happiness with some amazing brand examples. And we'll also be asking you to vote on some videos we want to share. There's too many videos to share, so we thought we'd be democratic and allow you to vote. And then at the end, we'll focus on really what it means for you. But as I looked at the list of people who were joining and registering for the event, I saw some very familiar faces. So hello, familiar faces and familiar clients, but also there's some new names and some new clients. Hello to you as well. So before I get going, I thought rather than show you a slide about who we are and what we do at BuzzBack, I'll show you a short 40-second video, and hopefully when we're showing it, you'll see some smiling faces of some of my colleagues as well. So here goes. Here's a 40-second sort of commercial. So I always wanted to be in advertising, so that's our advertising break there. So, why did we study happiness? Well, it doesn't need me to tell you that we're in the middle of a storm. I'll avoid using the swear word there, but we're in the middle of all kinds of things happening. And I use these newspapers here just to show some of them, because I think newspapers still have, certainly for me, some cachet around impact of what's been happening in the world. But rather depressingly, the Guardian newspaper has been describing what we're going through at the moment as a perma-crisis. And I think what they mean by that is it's just crisis after another, one major event after another, building on top of each other. And as you can see here, we've tried to list the main ones that are happening. And in fact, only this morning, if you're familiar with what's happened in the UK, the Prime Minister has resigned after, I think, 6 weeks. So we're in another crisis. So as I put these slides together, things were already changing. But also, in a sense, rather depressingly, I've added right at the end, what's next? Because I don't know about everyone on this call, but I don't think we're really realistically going to be in a sense of equilibrium either for a long time or certainly in the short term. So I think we have to be prepared for a permanent sort of state of crisis. And this really is part of the reason why we decided to study happiness now. It really is, well, when should we study happiness? Should we wait till it's all over? Or should we do it when we can and try and have a positive focus? So that's really why we're focusing on this subject. And of course, these events are having impact on consumer emotions and mental health, as we all know, but also they're changing people's attitudes to things, and more importantly, perhaps their behaviors. And with this in mind, I think it's worth pausing for a moment and just think of the power of emotions in driving decision-making. And you'll be familiar with many quotes about the importance of emotions in driving decisions. But I liked this one particularly because it's quite simple, from Psychology Today. And as you can see here, it says, your decisions are informed by your emotional responses, because that is what emotions do. They appraise and summarize an experience and inform an action. And this for me is really critical, why understanding emotions is so key. We rationalize a lot of our responses, but our decisions are usually driven by emotions. And that's really why we wanted to understand positive emotions, happiness, and some others that we'll get onto. So to try and contextualize it, what are the key global and personal concerns that are facing people today? And what are these doing in terms of impacting life satisfaction and indeed happiness? So let's just look at global first. So here, just for the UK and US, later I'll expand the study to talk about other markets. But we asked people, as you can see here, how do you personally feel right now about a number of these global issues? And you can see them here in international affairs, climate change, current events, politics, all at a fairly high level. And the number one, though, being the economy, with UK and US almost exactly the same in terms of the percentage feeling worried about these. And for those of you that are old enough to remember Bill Clinton, you'll know that there was a great quote by his strategist, a guy called James Carville. I'm certainly old enough to remember when his advice to Bill Clinton was, it was all about the economy stupid. I don't think he was calling Bill Clinton stupid. He had other reasons for doing that. But he ran against George Bush and was very successful because he focused on that, really on that one key subject, because he knew this was the key consideration. And I think, you know, that is probably as close to a truism in politics as you'll get. If you forget about the economy, you're probably going to lose. But also there are more personal concerns that we looked at. So we asked people here, what are their personal concerns? It's fine looking at those big picture things, but what are the things that impact you on a kind of day-to-day basis? And again, perhaps you'll not be surprised, given what I just said, that personal finances are the number one concern with things like physical, mental health. And we were coming out of COVID, of course, we still kind of are. But I think here, the personal finances piece, this is where the economy from the global concern hits people in the pocket. And if you hit people in the pocket, you've really got issues. So those are global personal concerns that we've been researching and looking at. But despite these concerns, when we try and look at some of the underlying values that people live their lives by, you can see here, among many that we asked them, I'm just showing the kind of top three, is perhaps you'll not be surprised that the number one is still family. And the other things like mental health, physical health, and indeed financial security are means to an end. So actually the family is it, and the other things are the things that impact on that family. So get the family right, and you're on your way to trying to be very positive with people. So what about happiness, which is one of the primary focus of today? Well, interestingly, we've been tracking happiness for some time. And you can see since November 21 up to only just a few weeks ago now, you can see that the movement has been up and down a little. Certainly post-COVID, there was a little bit of movement. But I wasn't surprised to see it at such a level. There's a lot in the literature, if you are interested in reading the literature on happiness. Here's a book which I don't particularly recommend because it's an economist's take on happiness, and economists can be, well, although they're very important, clearly they can be quite dull. And when you're reading a book on happiness that's written in a dull way, it does sort of conflict a little. But the academics have said that there's a lot to say about having a baseline happiness, that even when people have great hardship, you know, maybe they lose a loved one or they win the lottery, there's a little blip, but then it goes back to a kind of baseline. But one of the things that I'm not showing it here is what is declining in the two markets is optimism. So people's prediction to the future in terms of what's coming next is going down. People are less optimistic than they were. So given the importance of this particular emotion, we decided just coming out of COVID that we were hoping the world would be a big happy place. Little did we know the Ukraine war was just around the corner, but we were working with a health and wellness roundtable with Mondelez, with Danone and Colgate. And with those three clients, we decided to dig into happiness in much more detail. And we did it in the 4 countries you can see here. We covered different age groups and also different genders. And I'll touch upon some of these findings today. But the thing that we did to try and elicit more depth, because I hope you'd agree, seeing that little line showing that happiness goes up and goes down a bit on just a very simple scale, really doesn't sufficiently cover what happiness is, especially if Aristotle was right. It really is the important, perhaps the most important thing. So we used a number of tools that we've developed, from using video. I'll show you some videos in a moment of consumers around the world telling us what happiness means. Using some projective techniques that we've developed, one particular one some of you may be familiar with called collage, looking at the senses, taste, smell, and so on around happiness. And then looking at brands, what are brands associating with happiness, which brands people associate with it. But importantly, right at the top, there's a little note under our approach, and it says the remembering and experiencing self. And this is really important if you're a follower of Kahneman, the behavioral economist. And he says the most important thing is the remembering self. It isn't the experiencing self, the system one. In fact, if you listen to Kahneman, it's our memories of things that drive our decisions. And the point he makes, which I think is rather interesting, is if that weren't true, there'd be no such thing as a second child. So now I'm going to show you some videos of consumers speaking. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you what you think happiness is. So as you're watching these videos, it's around 2 minutes of people around the world. I'd like you just to think on what it means to you. And if you're feeling brave, put it into the chat, and Matthew will read some of them out. So here's a few videos of people telling us what happiness means to them.
A happy place would be anywhere I am with my daughter and her family, especially my grandson. He's just so full of life and laughter.
Felicidade ela está atrelada a com quem você se relaciona, como você interage com o meio onde você vive, com a sociedade, com a sua comunidade. Você está de bem com todo mundo, acho que você pode se considerar feliz.
Happiness for me is being close with friends and family and having inner love for yourself.
我通过和别人互动来获得幸福感。我平时喜欢和朋友、家人一起去旅游、看电影、聚餐。
My happy place is, honestly, I really like being by myself. That's probably my happy place.
Felicidade de verdade é ter uma casa, ter carro, ter bom dinheiro guardado na conta bancária.
If there's anything that makes me happy, it's being here at home and ideally with my cat. I just love being with my cat. It's so calming.
Felicidade é alcançada diariamente, né? Quando a gente acorda saudável, sem nenhum outro tipo de problema muito grave, a gente se sente feliz.
Walk down the beach, just for me, it's my safe haven. Even just sitting on the rocks or looking at shells with my daughter.
I'm happy when I'm sleeping. I'm happy when I'm eating. I'm happy when something good happens to me, or when I avoid something bad happening.
Eu acredito em viver e simplesmente deixar viver, curtindo o sorriso de uma criança, o som dos pássaros pela manhã, ou passeando no jardim florido, sentindo o perfume das rosas.
So I hope you enjoyed listening to people's little mini stories. And while I hope you're feeling brave enough to put some comments in the chat, I'm going to hopefully not surprise Mary by asking her, maybe Mary, if you're feeling brave enough to tell us what makes you happy.
Well, I have a little bit of an advantage since we've been working on this topic, but I think the surprising thing to me is that happiness is more complex than just happy or sad, and it can be achieved in many ways that we might not really expect. And as these people talked about, it's kind of the simple things in life, which is very encouraging to me, because that is such a democratic thing, right? That means that if you look for happiness in those things, you will find it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mary. So Matthew, has anyone, because I can't see the chat, anyone put anything, or do we have an audience that's sharing their happiness, or have they all been a bit quiet?
They have not, but something that makes me rather unhappy is they pointed out to me that I've not enabled the chat, I'm afraid. So if people want to use the Q&A, they can do that. While they do that, I'll say what I found fascinating about those videos is what's resonate. Two of the top ones that resonated with me were friends and family time and alone time. I figured that one out. Anyway, yes, please use the Q&A, everybody, and we will review those. If you can submit some ideas in there. Apologies.
It's okay, everyone. It's not some sort of conspiracy where we ask you what makes you happy and then we won't let you tell us. It's not George Orwell's 1984. So when we looked across all of the 1,600 interviews that we did, looking for some big themes, which I'm going to share today, we bucketed them, and then I'm trying to focus on the big pictures pieces, really. But I think what we saw is that people commonly derive happiness essentially from spending time with others. That was such a key element. And obviously coming out of COVID, where we'd been separated, made it even more so. Then you have eating and drinking, which actually is probably less about eating and drinking and more about being with others. You just happen to be eating and drinking. And that was particularly among the millennials that we identified. Vacations and travel, clearly, being with others, traveling to other parts of the world. But I think the bottom left here in terms of accumulation of wealth and success is an interesting one, and more of that later, that this particularly popped in the more developing countries, if I can call them that, China and Brazil, where actually, and we saw some of that in the video, where the accumulation of things makes people feel happy. We didn't see that as much in the UK and the US. And on the far right here, art, music, movies are things that people can kick back and make them happy. But interestingly, in the more individualistic Western countries of the UK and US, having a little bit of alone time as well, and that lady in the video certainly alluded to that. And I think this individualistic versus collectivism is something that kind of runs through the deck, as you'll see later. Bottom left, as almost as a footnote, is that actually social media didn't drive happiness at all. In fact, although arguably it's the way we keep connected with our friends and loved ones, it's also the source of a lot of unhappiness. So that's why you may be surprised to see it there, because it's this connection, but I'm not surprised because of the implications of some of it. But notice that health isn't mentioned here. And I guess you may be wondering why is that not something that people talk about? And that's because it's linked more to unhappiness, or the opposite of happiness. And the opposite of happiness, when we ask people, this was tied to isolation, to loss, to mental health issues, financial issues, sadness, pain, those kinds of issues. And so actually health, the absence of health will make people unhappy, but the presence of it rarely makes you happy, because largely people take it for granted. It's usually what, if you don't have it, then you kind of miss it. And those were some of the key things that we looked at. And you'll notice here I'm calling out China, particularly on the too busy can't pursue dreams, which is a bit of a footnote, but I think it's an interesting one if that's a market that you cover. Is you may have come across the 996 culture there, which is working from 9 in the morning until 9 in the evening for 6 days a week. That's 996. And famously, the Chinese equivalent of Jeff Bezos, Jack Ma, famously said it was a blessing to be part of this 996 work culture. But actually, after he said that, if you track him, you'll discover that he was sternly reminded by the Chinese authorities, and let's face it, who wants that in fact, what he was saying was illegal. And then Jack Ma disappeared for a while, only to come back on TV and other channels, a very different person. So I think there's a number of stories there about what can drive unhappiness. But also this isolation piece, I think is interesting when it links to health, because often people who have an alcohol problem or a food problem will eat or drink on their own. And certainly when we incarcerate people, we usually put them on their own to punish them by them not being with others. So kind of what drives happiness? So here I've just got a couple of collages from the exercise where we get people to use imagery to help trigger, to activate the silent, as Zoltman calls it, to help trigger the remembering cell. And when you look across 1,600 of them, I won't share all of them today, I'll just share 2 of them on the slide here. You'll see that not only do the colors and images help evoke their story, but if I just take the young Brazilian lady on the left here, she's talking about color because it makes her think of the sun and the feeling of happiness when it's shining. And then she goes down through it to talk about relationships and also connections with others. Similarly, the American lady on the right as well tells a similar story. So we get these kind of rich stories that we then want to analyze to actually see what are the overarching themes coming through here. And what we identified really when we did this exercise was that happiness really has a number of different emotions. Just as Mary said earlier, it's a complex emotion, but here we're seeing a sense of calm and ease on the left-hand side. You know, it's more reflective, it's more inner. And then on the right-hand side, you've got a more outer sort of projection, more outer directed communication around happiness. But when I first saw this data, what particularly chilled me was at the bottom when we looked at the colors people were associated with happiness in their collage. We didn't ask them directly, it was an indirected response from their collage. We saw that in the Brazil, UK, US, blue, in yellow for the UK, and white for China. And China, that white, in my understanding, symbolizes purity and fulfillment. And so this actually was connected to the subject of happiness. But also I was chilled because it looked suspiciously like the Ukrainian flag, which for me was rather chilling when I saw that, because those people weren't going through a particularly happy moment when we were doing this work. So thinking now about what people said gives them happiness, we now wanted to ask about how they might communicating it using social media, which, if you recall, was something that had caused a little bit of unhappiness, if you like. So how would they activate and socialize it? So what we did is ask people to give us the hashtags they would use if they were communicating happiness. And so you can see them here. And this is where you start to get a much more outer directed expression of happiness rather than this more reflective. And they're looking at shared moments, being with others, having fun. You can see here it's about family, particularly love, you know, these different special moments. Of course, we saw that millennials were much more likely to be posting or say they'd use hashtags. But I think what's interesting here is if you want an outer expression of happiness, look at this. The previous slides are more the reflective inner voice that we all have that talks to ourselves. So before I move on the discussion to focus a little bit on brands, I now just wanted to look at the senses. So here we simply wanted to know about what happiness looks like, smells like, sounds like, you know, and the texture and so on. And here you can see in nearly all markets on the left, the ocean, the blue being, and sunrise and sunset, you know, sunny days being part of what happiness looks like in terms of the senses. Then you have the smell, particularly flowers in the UK, you know, cut lawns, which I guess we're probably still famous for. Then in the sound of happiness. Interestingly, I was reading that one of the most downloaded apps during COVID was apps related to birdsong and identifying them, which I thought was intriguing. And then on the right-hand side, just as the gentleman from the UK was talking about the soft fur of his cat and him getting enjoyment from that. So if you like, happiness can also have a texture. But then when it comes to taste, which is our most dominant sense, arguably, when it comes to certainly food and drink, this was mainly around sweet products, chocolate. I've always thought that when we're doing concept research, if we put chocolate in almost anything, it would do well. And here you can see, those sweet treats, those indulgences, and also to some extent, Italian food, home cooking coming through. And perhaps for those of you who are familiar with the UK, no surprise there, certainly going through the politics that we're going through, we're all turning to alcohol. It's the only thing that we can do to control our sense of happiness. Joking, I think. So which brands spark happiness? So now the next section of we've explored it, what it means to people, how they may communicate it, and what those connections are. So now we wanted to look at which brands do they associate with happiness. And we did this using our sort of agile Tinder approach on a mobile, so people can swipe left and right. And on the left-hand side, first, it was this sort of spontaneous, which brands come to mind when you think about happiness? And on the right-hand side, we've just categorized them by market. And you can see there's a lot of similarity globally. So Nike, Apple, Coke, Cadbury are kind of coming through on a global level. Those brands are doing a great job on linking their products, those experiences to this emotion. You can see the clothing and automotive are higher in Brazil and China. That links back to what I was saying about, material things, as you can see at the center. 85% of Brazilians and Chinese people saying that material things contribute to happiness, less so in the markets of the UK and US. So much of the, if you like, the happiness coming through other experiences. And now before I hand over to Mary, just to dig into two of those categories with a little bit of an explanation of why. So food, these were some of the brands that we saw, and the reasons that people were describing them weren't just about taste, that's almost too obvious. But it was also about the feeling and associations, often with childhood, with holidays, with summer, with comfort, with a treat. So actually food and drink, as many of you on this call know, is much more complicated than just the calories and the liquid. It's about many different experiences. And I read not that long ago that people with dementia were using, or people treating them, were using sweets or confectionery from the people's childhood as aide-memoirs to help them trigger positive associations. It was nothing to do with the sweet. It was to do with their memories, and their best access was through some of their childhood treats, and obviously evoking their sense of happiness. And then here, talking about technology, clearly this was about connection. So that's really what I wanted to cover today, and I'm going to skip this just to get onto the section, because I'm overrunning, that Mary will take us through. So the different dimensions of happiness, we identified these here. You can see all of them on the slide here. And Mary will now take us through 5 different sort of mini little case studies, 1 slide per each, talking about what brands play a role in happiness, even in the crisis that we're in today. So over to you, Mary.
Great, thank you, Martin. And as Martin was saying, we all know that happiness is a really vital element to our lives. It's something that we all seek, but there are times, though, when it can seem sort of wrong or selfish to be pursuing happiness when there's so much swirling around in the world, as Martin noted, and fills our thoughts and our news feed. So for this and many other reasons, happiness and the lack of it has been in the news. And so there has been a lot to draw on, which is the approach that I take. I look at the broader culture to see what's bubbling up, what's shifting and changing. And I look at news and research and reports and all manner of material that I can get my hands on, and I distill it then into kind of primary or dominant themes. And I found 5 themes that represent what is shifting and changing around this, really important, but truly an elusive element. And brands can really help us see happiness when perhaps we don't, or we forget about it. And with the 5 themes that I'll present. I'm going to talk about a brand that I think is doing a really good job around that particular theme. And I'll give a little bit of an idea of an ad that we chose that is really a terrific example. And after I present all 5 themes, we'll ask you to vote on which one you'd like to view. So the first theme that we're going to take a look at is around belonging. And this is about as fundamental and evolutionarily important to maintaining social well-being as you can get. We are nothing without our family and friends and our community, and that extends locally well into global community as well, as we're affected by what's happening globally. You know, this idea of feeling welcomed or to be a member of or to be part of something is a potent and powerful phenomenon that can't be denied. And with the emphasis recently on DEI, this is diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's been an important step towards this idea of belonging and recognizing that being seen and being heard is really important to our lives. And one of the jobs that's done a really, one of the brands that's done a really good job of this is Heineken. They created an ad that they're calling Cheers to All Fans. And so most beer ads we know focus on men, but they really emphasize inclusion and reaching out to women who are, interestingly enough, almost half of football fans around the world. And so they're acknowledging their contribution to football fandom. So the second theme that we're going to take a look at is perspective. And, you know, we all really have to admit that at some point we succumbed to unattainable goals that we thought would make us happy, but ultimately don't. And now a lot of people are realizing that it isn't, you know, stuff or promotions or being skinny or winning or money that makes us happy. And so now we're looking for answers. And in fact, 4 million people have signed up for Laurie Santos's class that's now being offered for free on Coursera. It's called The Science of Well-Being, where she introduces a way to think about the misconceptions of happiness, to sort of reorient your perspective around what it really means to be happy and how you can achieve that. And maybe it's just a quiet, contented moment. And Michelob Ultra does a great job of helping us think about happiness in a new way with what they say. It's the narration through this really terrific ad is, what if we were wrong this whole time thinking that joy only happens at the end, after the sacrifice? What if happiness has always been there, fueling the run towards greatness? What if joy is the whole game, not just the end game? Are you happy because you win? Or do you win because you are happy? It's really a provocative idea. And our third area is around generosity. So this is, you know, report after research after report reminds us that kindness and gratitude and giving of yourself has benefits beyond just that act itself. And that doing kind things for others is an important path to happiness. A really terrific piece recently in The Atlantic took aim at the pandemic fad of self-care, which you all know about. And while acknowledging that taking time for yourself is really important, they also pointed out a new study that looked at a way to actually research your sense of self. It's important to actually show up for others, meaning giving to someone else. And the brand that we're highlighting here is Amazon and their piece titled Kindness, the Greatest Gift. And in this ad, it shows how just small acts of kindness can have an outsized impact. And it takes effort to actually build the sense of kindness, but it's returned to us as happiness. And the fourth area is around purpose. And brand purpose is what we hear most about, particularly in the field that we're all in. as consumers look to align themselves with companies that share their same values. But what about our own sense of purpose? Identifying what truly makes us happy, what gets us out of bed in the morning. To figure that out, really takes a lot of self-reflection. It takes risk-taking and honesty, but it can pay off in finding purpose and meaning and happiness. And with apologies to Michelle Obama, but she's sort of a brand herself, she gave a really fantastic commencement speech asking graduates to consider, who are you going to be? Not so specifically, what are you going to be? How are you going to deal with everything that life can throw at you when you get knocked down? How will you get back up? How will you dig deep to find out who you really are? What's meaningful to you? So purpose really means understanding, looking inward to achieve your sense of happiness. And the last theme, number 5, is around nature. And we've known for a long time that nature possesses this superpower. It's a restorative power that cures much of what ails us with beauty and peace and solitude and quiet and awe and happiness. And there's an interesting study from the American Psychological Association that it's a complex study, but it reported on feeling connected to nature was a significant predictor of happiness. And the brand that we're highlighting here is from Burberry and their film Open Spaces. And I challenge you not to smile when you watch this ad, as the cast in the piece bounds weightlessly through this field and kind of blurring the lines between fantasy and reality. It's tremendously fun, and all in effort of achieving the brand's goal to create products that help people embrace the outdoors and explore new spaces and places. So that's the 5 themes, and we have them summarized here, which each of the ads that we identified align with these themes. And so Matthew's going to help you vote on which one you would like to see. So Matthew, what do people need to do here?
Thanks, Mary. I've just launched the poll. If you could all vote, and then we will shortly let you know which one's been picked, which 2 have been picked.
These are some fantastic pieces, and I know, Martin, you've watched a couple of them as well. It was really hard to choose.
It was, and I have a real favorite, but I'm not going to lead the audience. Suffice to say, I have given Matthew money so that hopefully the one I want is to.
Great.
It's in the post.
It's really exciting, though, just to see brands engaging in something really fundamental and important to our world, and such, really enormous creativity and insight into what works for their audiences.
So Matthew, we've been discussing long enough now. So the question
sorry, Martin.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so about 3/4 of people have voted, and that I think that's all the votes we're going to get. And belonging at number 1, belonging, and number 5, nature, are quite a long way in the lead.
Interesting. Okay.
That's really great, because
thanks for voting, everyone.
That's the 2 I wanted. So I will run number 1 and I will run number 5. So here goes. So and this is really important. The music to this is really important to me. And those of you that are familiar with English Premier League football will probably know why. But here, I'll run it. It's a minute long, and then I'll come back.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high. At the end of a storm,
Okay, so that was number one, and so if anyone didn't like that, I'll have a word with them. So finally, I will now play this one, and this is a little bit longer, but worth every second of it. So that's quite extraordinary. I know it's quite long, but a quite extraordinary ad just there. And I will be practicing that later on Richmond Green, which is where I live. Wants to come and join. So now really to just sum up, if I can sum up all of what we've covered in just one slide. So I think what we've shown, hopefully, and what we've identified is that right at the heart of it is the family. It's about connections. It's about shared experiences. It's about moments. It's about passion. It's being connected. We are humans. We're not machines just yet, anyway. And those small everyday pleasures, we saw that in some of the brands, you know, that offer comfort, indulgence, escape, can actually really help people, you know, to achieve these little moments of happiness. And if you're a brand or a service where you're not really operating in that area, you can also make people happier by removing some sludge, as the behavioral economists call it. You stop making things difficult for people that will make them happier. We saw the importance of nature. That I don't think can be overstated. The fact that we all have wonderful pets, these natural outdoor associations, I think that is a critical element in what makes us happy. And also, you know, the destruction of the climate is something that makes us unhappy, the other side of that. And then the final thing is, I think just as when you're in an aeroplane and it says, put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help others, I think kindness to yourself, helping yourself before you can help maybe other members of your family and wider circle are key considerations. So brands and service that can help with that connection. If you can be associated with happiness, you can achieve some of the success, some of the brands that we've mentioned in this presentation. So that's really all that we had to share. If there is any questions or are any questions, we'd be happy to take them now. Matthew, if you want to read out any, if we could maybe just pick one, because I know we're overrunning a little.
Yes, certainly. So we've got one question. So it's somewhat, I'm reading this out live because it's just come in, but was there any, hang on a second, no, another little box has popped up in front there. Was there one scent that had more responses than any others? I work for a flavour stroke fragrance company and would love to see more about the smells and scents that made people happy, and actually interested in seeing more on all of the senses.
Yes, we can certainly share that. I mean, what I shared was, look, we asked about each individual sense rather than a hierarchy of senses. So that's something we can dig into, but mainly we were looking at each individual sense on that. So conscious of time, if there are questions, we'll come back to you, or you can email me. But also just wanted to say that often when we do these webinars, we will then follow up and, see if we can help. But we are more than happy if there are emotions that you'd like to understand or just debate with us, just like that previous question. We'd love to, discuss it with you, maybe share some more information. So please, if you are interested, email me at martin@buzzback.com, and whether it's myself or I'll direct it to more appropriate colleague, we'd be more than happy to discuss that with you. And take it further. So Matthew, I'm going to hand back to you just to finish up.
Sure.
Thank you,
thank you, Martin. And yeah, thank you, Martin and Mary. That was absolutely fantastic. And I agree, those two ads at the end, which I hadn't seen actually, were absolutely incredible. Thanks everyone for your questions, and also thank you for the very lovely feedback you've been putting into the chat. I'll make sure that gets back to Martin and Mary. I'm glad you've all enjoyed it. Just 3 things to mention. On the 27th of October, the next edition of our consumer tracker, which is now called the Buzz, we started it back in March 2020, so you can see lots of constants tracked in that, all available on our website. With each edition of that, we go back to the regular stats that we track, plus a deep dive on something special. And on October 27th is going to be on holidays. 10th of November, we're at IIEX Health in Philadelphia. I'm not sure if any of you are going to be there, but we're looking forward to that. And on the 17th of November, our next webinar is, for those of you in healthcare, it's about the impact of the recent decision in the US on the Roe v. Wade ruling, and the impact that that's going to have on primary care and how that's provided. And we hope to see you there. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Martin and Mary, and we'll see you all soon. Cheers.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.